Behind the laughs and groundbreaking storylines of this beloved sitcom lurked incredible secrets. A star fired twice for drug use, who lived a shocking family scandal. A tool belt borrowed from a studio electrician that became iconic, and a co-creator whose daughter became a major TV star on a completely different show. Fact 1. Creator's daughter became a bigger star. Most people don't realize that the woman who co-created One Day at a Time had a daughter who would go on to become one of television's most beloved sitcom mothers on a completely different show. Whitney Blake, who developed the series alongside her husband Alan Mannings, drew inspiration from her own experiences as a divorced single mother raising 3 children in the 1950s and 60s. Blake's personal story of navigating life as a single working parent became the foundation for Anne Romano's character and the entire premise of One Day at a Time. The struggles, triumphs, and daily challenges that Blake faced while balancing her acting career with motherhood were woven directly into the show's storylines. But what makes this connection even more fascinating is that one of Blake's 3 children would later achieve greater fame than the show itself. That child was Meredith Baxter, who was born Meredith Ann Baxter in 1947. While her mother was creating groundbreaking television about single motherhood, Meredith was growing up and developing her own acting talents. By the time One Day at a Time premiered in 1975, Meredith had already begun her television career. But her biggest role was still years away. In 1982, just as One Day at a Time was hitting its stride, Meredith Baxter landed the role that would define her career: Elise Keaton on Family Ties. Playing the liberal former flower child mother opposite Michael J. Fox, Baxter became a household name and earned multiple Emmy nominations. The irony is remarkable when you think about it. While Whitney Blake was telling stories about single motherhood on One Day at a Time, her own daughter was simultaneously becoming famous for playing a married mother on one of the decade's biggest hit comedies. Fact 2. Mackenzie Phillips was fired twice. In what might be one of the most dramatic behind-the-scenes stories in television history, Mackenzie Phillips became the first actor to be fired twice from the same hit sitcom for the same reason. Playing the rebellious teenage daughter Julie Cooper, Phillips was earning $50,000 per week when her real-life struggles with addiction began affecting her work on One Day at a Time. The problems started becoming visible during the show's 3rd season in 1977, when Phillips was arrested for disorderly conduct. Her drug and alcohol abuse grew worse over the following years, causing her to arrive late for rehearsals and sometimes appear incoherent on set. The producers initially tried to help by ordering her to take a 6-week break in 1980 to overcome her addiction, but when that didn't solve the problem, they made the difficult decision to fire her. Phillips' character, Julie, was written off the show by having her marry flight attendant Max Horvath and move to Houston. During this time, Phillips entered Fair Oaks Hospital voluntarily for treatment after suffering 2 near-fatal overdoses. After completing her rehabilitation program in 1981, the producers of One Day at a Time decided to give her a second chance and invited her back to the series. Unfortunately, Phillips relapsed into cocaine use in 1982, and her problems came to a head during the 9th season in 1983. Producer Patricia Fass Palmer found Phillips sleeping backstage on the set and woke her up to ask for a urine test. Phillips' response was blunt and telling. She simply told Palmer not to bother with the test. This incident led to her permanent firing from the show, making television history as the only actor to be dismissed twice from the same series for substance abuse issues. Fact 3. The iconic tool belt was stolen. One of television's most recognizable character accessories was created through an act of desperation just 30 minutes before cameras started rolling on the very first episode of One Day at a Time. Pat Harrington, Jr., who played the building superintendent Dwayne Schneider, realized at the last possible moment that something crucial was missing from his character's look. Harrington had already prepared extensively for the role, growing a Clark Gable-style mustache to give Schneider his notorious ladies' man appearance and carefully selecting the character's trademark white t-shirt and denim vest combination. But as he stood ready to film that first scene, something felt incomplete about the costume. Schneider was supposed to be a working handyman who took pride in his tools and his ability to fix anything in the apartment building. Yet Harrington felt the character needed something more to sell that image convincingly. With just half an hour left before filming began, Harrington spotted a studio electrician working nearby and noticed the man's well-worn tool belt hanging around his waist. The belt was perfectly weathered and authentic looking, complete with a hammer and other essential tools that would give Schneider the professional appearance Harrington was seeking. Without hesitation, Harrington approached the electrician and offered to pay him for the belt on the spot. The electrician agreed to the unusual transaction, and Harrington immediately strapped the tool belt around his hips, wearing it John Wayne style as part of Schneider's signature swagger. That spontaneous purchase became so integral to the character that Schneider was rarely seen without his tool belt throughout the show's entire 9-season run. The belt became such an iconic part of television history that when the show was rebooted decades later, the new character Elena even recreated Schneider's entire look, tool belt included. Fact 4. The Secret Service investigated the show. In one of the most unusual crossovers between fictional television and real-world government agencies, One Day at a Time featured a storyline that brought the United States Secret Service directly into Anne Romano's living room. The episode, titled Fighting City Hall, which aired on February 17, 1976, dealt with what seemed like a simple domestic problem that spiraled completely out of control. The plot centered around Anne Romano receiving an excessive phone bill that she believed contained errors, prompting her to write complaint letters to various government officials in an attempt to get the billing mistake corrected. What started as a reasonable consumer complaint quickly escalated when Anne's frustration led her to write letters all the way up the chain of command, eventually reaching City Hall, and ultimately, the President of the United States. In the episode, Anne's persistent letter-writing campaign triggers an unexpected visit from Secret Service agents who show up at her apartment door to investigate her correspondence with the President. The agents treat her letters as a potential security concern, turning what began as a simple billing dispute into a federal matter that requires official investigation. This storyline was particularly noteworthy because it aired during a time when President Gerald Ford had recently survived 2 assassination attempts in 1975, making presidential security an especially sensitive topic. The show's writers managed to find humor in the situation while also highlighting how ordinary citizens could inadvertently find themselves under government scrutiny simply for exercising their right to petition their government. The episode demonstrated the show's ability to take everyday problems and push them to absurd but believable extremes, creating comedy from the kind of bureaucratic nightmares that many viewers could relate to, even if they had never actually had the Secret Service knock on their door. Fact 5. Bonnie Franklin nearly quit after 15 episodes. The star of One Day at a Time almost walked away from the role that would define her career after just 15 episodes, threatening to quit unless the show's quality improved dramatically. Bonnie Franklin, who played divorced mother Anne Romano, was so dissatisfied with the direction and writing of the first season that she issued an ultimatum to producers that could have ended the series before it really began. Franklin's frustration stemmed from what she saw as poor script quality and a lack of creative vision in the show's early episodes. Both she and her co-star Pat Harrington Jr. later admitted in a Fox television special called The Truth Behind the Sitcoms that none of the episodes from the first season were very good. Franklin felt that the writing wasn't living up to the show's potential to address serious social issues while still maintaining its comedic appeal. The situation reached a breaking point when Franklin went to the producers with her concerns about the show's direction. She was not pleased with how her character was being developed and felt that the series was missing opportunities to tackle the meaningful topics that had attracted her to the project in the first place. Franklin had been drawn to One Day at a Time because of its potential to explore the real challenges facing divorced mothers in the 1970s, but she felt the early scripts were failing to deliver on that promise. Rather than simply complaining, Franklin demanded more creative input into the series and threatened to leave if changes weren't made. The producers, recognizing that losing their lead actress would be catastrophic for the show, agreed to give Franklin greater creative control over the direction of her character and the storylines. This decision proved to be crucial for the series' success, as Franklin's input helped transform One Day at a Time into the groundbreaking show it became. Fact 6. Whitney Houston was named after the co-creator. One of the most surprising connections between One Day at a Time and pop music history was revealed decades after both the show and the singer had become cultural icons. Whitney Houston, the legendary vocalist who became one of the best-selling music artists of all time, was actually named after Whitney Blake, the actress and writer who co-created One Day at a Time with her husband Alan Mannings. This fascinating connection remained largely unknown to the public until it was disclosed in the 2018 documentary simply titled Whitney, which explored the life and career of the late singer. The documentary revealed that Houston's parents chose the name Whitney specifically in honor of Blake, though the exact nature of the relationship between the Houston family and Whitney Blake was not detailed in the film. Whitney Blake had established herself as a recognizable television actress long before she became a creator and producer, most notably playing Dorothy Baxter on the early 1960s sitcom Hazel, alongside Shirley Booth. Blake's career in entertainment spanned several decades, during which she appeared in numerous television shows and films before transitioning into writing and producing work that would culminate in her co-creation of One Day at a Time. The timing makes the connection even more interesting, as Whitney Houston was born in 1963, more than a decade before One Day at a Time premiered in 1975. This means that Blake's influence on the Houston family predated her most famous creative work, suggesting that her earlier acting career and television presence had already made enough of an impression to inspire parents to name their daughter after her. The revelation adds an unexpected layer to both women's legacies, connecting a groundbreaking television creator with one of music's most beloved voices. Fact 7. The show's title became tragically ironic. In what might be one of the most painfully ironic coincidences in television history, the title, One Day at a Time, took on a deeply personal and literal meaning for one of its stars during the 1979 to 1980 season. While Mackenzie Phillips was playing the rebellious teenager Julie Cooper on screen, she was simultaneously battling a real-life drug addiction that would force her to embrace the show's title as her daily reality. The phrase, "one day at a time," is central to Alcoholics Anonymous and other 12-step recovery programs, representing the fundamental approach to sobriety where individuals focus on staying clean and sober for just one day, rather than thinking about the overwhelming prospect of never using again for the rest of their lives. This philosophy encourages people in recovery to take their sobriety in manageable, 24-hour increments rather than becoming overwhelmed by the enormity of lifelong abstinence. During the show's fourth season, Phillips's addiction problems became so severe that she was dealing with the exact struggles that the AA saying was designed to address. Her cocaine and alcohol abuse had reached dangerous levels, affecting her work on the show and putting her health at serious risk. When Phillips finally entered Fair Oaks Hospital for treatment in 1980, she was literally learning to live one day at a time, following the recovery program's core principle that shared its name with the very show that had made her famous. The irony became even more profound when considering that Phillips was starring in a show about a family overcoming challenges and finding strength in their daily struggles, while she herself was fighting the biggest battle of her life. The title that represented hope and perseverance for Ann Romano's fictional family became Phillips' real-world mantra for survival and recovery. Fact 8. Mackenzie Phillips made $50,000 per week. At just 16 years old, Mackenzie Phillips was earning an absolutely staggering salary that made her one of the highest-paid teenage actors in television history. During her time on One Day at a Time, Phillips received $50,000 per week for playing Julie Cooper, a sum that would be equivalent to approximately $280,000 per week in today's money when adjusted for inflation. To put this enormous salary into perspective, Phillips was earning more per week than many people made in an entire year during the mid-1970s. The average American household income in 1975 was around $13,000 annually, which means Phillips was making nearly 4 times the typical family's yearly earnings in just 7 days of work. This made her not only one of the wealthiest teenagers in America, but also placed her among the top earners in all of television. Phillips' massive paycheck reflected both the show's success and the value that CBS and producer Norman Lear placed on her performance as the rebellious older daughter. One Day at a Time quickly became a ratings hit, and Phillips' portrayal of Julie Cooper was central to the show's appeal, particularly among younger viewers who identified with her character's struggles with independence and authority. The irony of Phillips' enormous earnings became more apparent later when her drug addiction spiraled out of control, as she had access to virtually unlimited funds to support her cocaine habit. In interviews, Phillips later acknowledged that her substantial income provided her with the financial means to sustain her addiction far longer than would have been possible otherwise. The $50,000 per week that represented her professional success also became an enabling factor in her personal struggles, giving her the resources to purchase drugs without the financial constraints that might have forced her to confront her addiction sooner. Fact 9. There were 2 different pilots. Before One Day at a Time became the beloved family sitcom that audiences knew and loved, Norman Lear and the creative team filmed a completely different version that would have taken the show in an entirely different direction. The original pilot, which was shot in 1975, had the working title 3 to Get Ready, and featured a dramatically different premise that bore little resemblance to the final series. In this first version, Bonnie Franklin's character Anne worked as a nurse rather than in an advertising agency, and the entire show was set in a hospital environment instead of the Indianapolis apartment that became the series' main location. Even more significantly, Anne had only one teenage daughter instead of the two daughters who would become central to the show's family dynamic. Mackenzie Phillips was cast in this original pilot, but there was no second daughter character, which meant no Valerie Bertinelli and no Barbara Cooper. The pilot also featured Pat Harrington Jr. as Schneider, the apartment building superintendent, showing that his character was always intended to be part of the series regardless of the setting. However, the original version included Marcia Rod as Anne's neighbor and friend, a role that would undergo significant changes in the retooled version. When CBS passed on 3 to Get Ready, Lear made the decision to completely rework the concept rather than abandon it entirely. He scrapped the hospital setting entirely, recognizing that it wasn't providing the right atmosphere for the kind of stories he wanted to tell about single motherhood and family relationships. The addition of a second daughter proved to be crucial, as it allowed for more complex family dynamics and gave the writers opportunities to explore different types of teenage personalities and problems through Julie and Barbara's contrasting characters. Fact 10. A cast member vanished without explanation. In one of the strangest disappearing acts in television history, a major character on One Day at a Time simply vanished from the show without any explanation, never to be seen or mentioned again. Mary Louise Wilson, who played Ginny Roblicki, Anne Romano's cocktail waitress neighbor and best friend, appeared in 14 episodes during the second season before completely disappearing from the series as if she had never existed. Ginny Roblicki was introduced as Anne's comedic foil after the producers decided to write out Richard Mazure's character David Kane early in the second season. Norman Lear specifically chose Wilson for the role because she had just completed a successful Broadway run as Tessitura in a revival of Gypsy starring Angela Lansbury. Wilson was signed to play a cocktail waitress who moves into Schneider's apartment building and immediately becomes Anne's confidante and partner in various adventures. However, Wilson was deeply unhappy with the role from the very beginning. She later wrote in her memoir, "My First 100 Years in Show Business," that she had never even seen an episode of One Day at a Time before being cast and found the show's humor completely unfunny. Wilson also struggled with the 4-camera filming process in front of a live studio audience, describing the awkward pauses between camera shots as lasting longer than the river Styx. The situation became even more complicated when Wilson clashed with Bonnie Franklin, who reportedly felt upstaged by Wilson's Broadway background and comedic timing. At the end of the second season, Wilson begged her agent to ask Norman Lear to release her from her contract, and her request was granted. After her departure, Ginny Roblicki was never seen, referenced, or heard from again, except for a brief appearance in a 5th-season clip show episode that featured flashbacks from earlier seasons. Fact 11. Valerie Bertinelli's fan mail overwhelmed CBS. Within just one season of One Day at a Time premiering, 15-year-old Valerie Bertinelli had become such a massive teen heartthrob that CBS was literally drowning in fan mail addressed to the young actress. Pat Harrington Jr., who played Schneider on the show, later revealed that the studio was receiving such enormous sacks of fan mail for Bertinelli that they could barely cope with the sheer volume of letters pouring in from viewers across the country. Bertinelli's portrayal of Barbara Cooper, the younger Romano daughter, struck an immediate chord with audiences who were charmed by her girl-next-door appearance, button nose, and lush mane of hair. Her wholesome Italian Catholic family background and natural screen presence made her an instant favorite, particularly among teenage viewers who saw her as relatable and approachable. The fan response was so overwhelming that it quickly became clear that Bertinelli was destined to be the breakout star of the series. The massive fan mail response was particularly remarkable considering that this was long before the internet and social media made it easy for fans to connect with their favorite celebrities. In the 1970s, writing and mailing a physical letter was the primary way for viewers to express their appreciation for performers, making the volume of correspondence even more impressive. The letters weren't just typical fan mail asking for autographed pictures, but were often heartfelt messages from viewers who felt a genuine connection to Bertinelli's character and her portrayal of teenage life. The studio's struggle to handle Bertinelli's fan mail volume became so notorious that it was frequently mentioned in behind-the-scenes interviews and television specials about the show. This unprecedented response helped establish Bertinelli as one of the most popular young actresses of the decade and led to her appearing on countless magazine covers throughout the late 1970s. Fact 12. Elton John sent Valerie an autographed photo. In one of the most delightful celebrity encounters from the show's history, Valerie Bertinelli received a personally autographed photo from one of the world's biggest pop stars after performing one of his most famous songs on One Day at a Time. Bertinelli, who was a huge Elton John fan in real life, got the chance to perform the singer's hit duet, Don't Go Breaking My Heart, alongside Mackenzie Phillips during one of the show's episodes, with both actresses appearing in full costume. The performance was memorable enough that someone from the show's crew decided to send a copy of the taped segment directly to Elton John himself, presumably thinking the British pop icon might enjoy seeing his song performed by two young television stars. What happened next was completely unexpected and showed Elton John's famous sense of humor and genuine appreciation for his fans. After watching the performance, Elton John was so entertained by Bertinelli's costume and appearance during the song that he took the time to personally mail her an autographed photograph. The inscription on the photo was both hilarious and endearing, reading, "You look more like me than I do." This witty message referred to the flamboyant costume and styling that Bertinelli had worn during the performance, which apparently bore enough resemblance to Elton John's own theatrical stage presence to amuse the singer. The fact that one of the world's most famous musicians took the time to acknowledge a teenage actress's performance on a television sitcom speaks to both Elton John's gracious personality and the genuine charm of Bertinelli's tribute to his music. The autographed photo became a treasured keepsake for Bertinelli, representing an unexpected connection between her television work and one of her musical heroes during the height of both their careers in the late 1970s. Fact 13. The final season was a backdoor pilot. What many viewers didn't realize while watching the final season of One Day at a Time was that one particular episode was actually serving a secret purpose beyond advancing the show's storyline. The episode, titled Another Man's Shoes, was designed as what television producers call a backdoor pilot, meaning it was testing the waters for a potential spin-off series that would continue after the main show ended. The episode focused on Schneider receiving news that he needed to leave Indianapolis and move to Florida to take care of his orphaned niece and nephew, effectively setting up an entirely new premise for a show that would center around Pat Harrington Jr.'s beloved character. The storyline was carefully crafted to introduce viewers to Schneider's new living situation and the family responsibilities that would drive the proposed spin-off series, giving audiences a taste of what this new show might look like. The timing of this backdoor pilot made perfect sense from a business perspective, as both Bonnie Franklin and Valerie Bertinelli had decided not to renew their contracts after 9 seasons on One Day at a Time. However, the show's ratings were still strong enough that CBS was interested in finding a way to continue the franchise in some form. Schneider had become such a popular character that network executives believed he could successfully carry his own series. The proposed spin-off would have followed Schneider as he adjusted to life in Florida while caring for his young relatives, presumably mixing his trademark humor with more family-oriented storylines. Unfortunately for fans of the character, the backdoor pilot failed to generate enough interest from network executives, and the Schneider spin-off was never picked up for production. This meant that when One Day at a Time ended its run in May of 1984, Pat Harrington Jr. had to hang up his famous tool belt for good. Fact 14. Eddie Van Halen never got paid for Beat It. In one of the most generous and casual contributions to music history, Eddie Van Halen created one of the most iconic guitar solos of the 1980s without receiving a single dollar in payment. While he was married to Valerie Bertinelli during the early 1980s, Eddie was approached to play guitar on Michael Jackson's song Beat It from the groundbreaking Thriller album, and his laid-back approach to the collaboration resulted in him essentially giving away what would become one of his most famous performances. According to Bertinelli, Eddie's decision to participate in the recording was completely spontaneous and informal. He never called lawyers or managers to negotiate a contract, and he didn't ask for any payment or royalties from what would become one of the biggest songs of Jackson's career. Instead, Eddie simply went down to the studio and laid down the legendary guitar riff and solo that helped make Beat It a massive crossover hit that appealed to both pop and rock audiences. The casual nature of Eddie's involvement becomes even more remarkable when considering the enormous success that Beat It achieved. The song became one of Jackson's signature hits and helped Thriller, become the best-selling album of all time, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue over the decades. Eddie's guitar work was absolutely crucial to the song's appeal, particularly among rock fans who might not have otherwise embraced a Michael Jackson track. The only compensation Eddie ever received for his contribution to this musical masterpiece was a Laserdisc player that Michael Jackson sent to him and Bertinelli as a thank you gift after the song became a hit. This modest gesture pales in comparison to the fortune that Eddie could have earned if he had negotiated proper royalties for his guitar work on one of the most successful songs in pop music history. Fact 15. The travel agency set became Al Bundy's shoe store. In a perfect example of how television studios recycle expensive sets to save money, the workplace set from One Day at a Time's final season got a second life as one of the most memorable locations in sitcom history. The travel agency where Barbara and Max worked during the show's 9th season was later transformed and reused as Gary's Shoes and Accessories, the shoe store where Al Bundy suffered through his daily misery on Married with Children. During the final season of One Day at a Time, which aired in 1983 to 1984, several characters worked at a travel agency that served as one of the show's primary workplace settings. The set designers had created a functional office environment complete with desks, filing cabinets, and the typical business furnishings that would be expected in a travel agency during the early 1980s. When One Day at a Time ended its 9-year run in May of 1984, the expensive set pieces didn't go to waste. Television studios routinely store and repurpose sets from canceled shows, as building new sets from scratch is both time-consuming and costly. The travel agency set was kept in storage until 1987, when the new Fox network was preparing to launch Married with Children, their groundbreaking and controversial sitcom about the dysfunctional Bundy family. The producers of Married with Children recognized that the former travel agency set could be easily modified to serve as Al Bundy's shoe store workplace, where Ed O'Neill's character would spend countless episodes complaining about his job, his customers, and his life in general. With some strategic redressing and the addition of shoe displays and retail fixtures, the set was successfully transformed from a place where people planned dream vacations into a place where Al Bundy's dreams went to die.